Hello, I think that's working. Okay, welcome to Wellrailed, kicked off again. This was meant to be Jordan emceeing, but he has been unfortunately isolated, so I'm running it instead. I'm AJ. I think I recognise a fair few of you anyway. Right, Gabe, do you want to do like a quick health and safety thing, and then?
I think so.
Sure.
Hi, Phoebe. Phoebe, were you going to come and do the health and safety thing? Otherwise, I can quickly do it. Can you just grab Julie real quick? For everyone here, hello online, just a quick second plug. The drinks fridge is good to go. Hey, it's just around the corner if you want any drinks. There's snacks there as well. I think we've got pizza coming at like 6:30. We'll just wait for a quick health and safety plug from our awesome friend, Julie. Any fillers? I wish I had some jokes. You want to have a good one?
Got some bad ones.
That probably do. Here comes Julie and Tana, if you haven't met Tana before. The local office dog.
Hello everyone, I'm Julie, Head of People and Culture here at Optimal. We have a restroom situation behind the bar. So if you need to go to the restroom there, if you need to, in an earthquake, drop, cover, hold, stay in the building. It's a little bit elevated. It's probably best to stay here until we get told to head up Mount Victoria. Not sure how far up Mount Victoria the tsunami zone is. In the event of a fire, we will go back out the stairs of the main entrance and our pointers across at the bus stop. So if everyone can just be there so we can count everyone and make sure everyone's accounted for, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, have a great night. Hand over to you, Gabe. Back to AJ. Thanks, AJ.
Well, thanks very much to Optimal Workshop for hosting this. This is quite a cool space. I haven't been here before. So I'm sure, I think this was online, but a quick run through the plan. So first up, we've got Thorsten telling us how to have fun with a 15-year-old code base, which I'm personally quite interested in. I think that will go for about half an hour or 20 minutes with a 10-minute Q&A. See how time goes. It's always a bit of a challenge to control. Next up, we have Lucy with making deleted data useful. And I think that also a bit of Q&A there. And then that will be similarly about half an hour. And then Gabe, we have Optimal Workshop story. And that will be hopefully about half an hour. And then it's pizza time. And then more questions, or we'll figure out when we get to that point. Cool. Yeah, I think that's probably all we need to say. Over to Thorsten.
Get it in close. Can you hear me well? Typical online conference question. Share screen. No. Well, I'm sharing my screen. I can't see it here. Yeah, so you should get a really slide. Oh, here we go. Do it. Easy. So yeah, I haven't given a public talk in a while now. I think the last one was Wellrailed in 2012. So bear with me if I'm a bit nervous. Yeah, how do I have fun with a 15-year-old code base? Let me start a bit with me. So I'm Thorsten. I'm originally from Germany. My last name is actually Böttger, but as you can see, like mostly whenever I put that somewhere in some form, you get actually Böttger. I have been 15 years a contractor in Germany, and I'm with Sharesight now for 10 years. I love to code. I love Ruby and Rails for 16 years now. So my agenda for today is actually talking a bit about Sharesight, my current career, break up the title, look at the fun part of it, and talk a bit about the issues we have, and conclude with the answer to the question if it's actually fun. So let me talk a bit about Sharesight. So Sharesight is a SaaS company here from Wellington, New Zealand, with half of the company in Sydney. We help our users normally to understand their own investment portfolio. It got founded 15 years ago, surprising, with the help of AbleTech, Marcus and Nigel. It wasn't AbleTech at the time. The main things we are doing, we're importing data, we parse uploaded data sheets, parse PDF files, we provide an API, and we provide useful reports, hopefully. It sounds always just one single application, but if you look at it, there's actually a lot of components in there. So it's just the core app, Invest app, but it has a lot of things around it. So the red part is actually written in Ruby. We've got a feed engine written in Elixir, and we've got a couple of front-end stuff, which is mainly based on React now. It all started 2007 as a typical Rails project. So server-side rendered HTML, a bit of jQuery, a MySQL in the back with Solr search engine, based on IBM soft layer, using Subversion and test unit by the time with a self-hosted integrity build system, and WordPress to host our web pages. Now it's majestic Rails monolith with React on the front end. Don't exactly ask me where the React part in this image is, but we had lots of different developers over time, and it's heading towards single page application nowadays with a JBuilder API. It's we have 12 gems, some of them are private, some of them public. Our test suite runs in 80 minutes, but rarely someone does that locally. Normally it's just done on the CI server, which is parallelized, and it just boils it down to 8 minutes. We have mini-test, Cypress, Jest for testing. As I said, the Elixir feed engine and some Lambda functions, and Elasticsearch. We've got Redis now. We are based on AWS, as most people, with Cloudflare protection and Gatsby for hosting our static pages. Let's break down the title. So how to have fun with 15-year-old code base. So focus on code base because it's a Rails meetup. Have fun. Why have fun? And that's actually an interesting question, because if you start a project freshly, from left to right, it's all fun. It's all great. It's a small code base. It's fast running tests. Nothing's hard. Everything's a lot of fun. So over time, your fun level actually degrades from there, and every one of us have their own personal frustration limit. And once you get across that line, so it doesn't make any fun anymore, you're starting to think about leaving the company or the project or whatever. So having fun with the 15-year-old code base, what's special about this? Actually, you have to stretch the whole timeline. And actually, how does this even work? So let's have a look at that. In the core, it is basically, guys, you have to stay over the line. All of us have different frustration levels. For some, it's 10%. For some, it's 70%. As a company, as a team, you have to stay above the line. That's the key thing about us. And now to the how part. That's the main focus for today. So if you look at fun, you first have to look at what no fun actually means. So we all are aware of bad code. That means poorly written code, spaghetti code, unstructured code, orphan code, worst practice code, what else? Non-Rails, Rails code, duplicated code, dead code. So and the gist of it is not maintainable, or worse, it's not readable. You have the urgent wish to refactor, to rewrite, or just throw it out. The same goes for tests. That means you have no tests at all. You have broken tests, you have slow tests, intermittently failing, favorite. Tests that require a special setup or environment. We all know that. So that means it's all leading to what the fucks per minute. So let's focus a bit on the fun part. So what do you need? Let's start with people. You surely need people to focus on digging the tunnels and moving forward, so bringing the business into the right direction. And even in order to not just have a stable business, but to attract users, and grow and flourish, but to keep and grow in development size as well. But at the same time, you need people who are taking care of what's left behind. So if you dig tunnels, you have to have people who take care of the tunnel itself, so it's basically not falling down. So I had to look it up in English. So you have to provide some supporting pillars. Is that right? No. So, and in addition, you need time. So to invest, you have to invest time now in order to get some payback later in the long run. In short, just take the time to sharpen your tools. And so you use people and tools in order to get here. So this is a quote from Microsoft CEO. If you have the choice between improving the way we work or adding a new feature, then choose improving the way we work. If I can quote a Microsoft guy, then you can do continuous renovation. This is a circle, so you can start anywhere you like. At least you have to get into this routine. Let's start with people. If you have the right people, they take ownership of any concern of your company, of your project, which then leads to long-term thinking, which then encourages small improvements over time, which then again motivates people and attracts people. Let's have a look at some code, because it's a code meetup as well. So small changes. Flip over your controller tests from using action controller test case to integration tests. That's recommended approach by Rails nowadays. But with that, you avoid looking at the signs, and you're just testing your behavior instead. Or larger changes. This is what our first API looked like. It was basically a self-written JSON builder. You can not see the documentation because it wasn't a different file, so we tried to solve this by introducing our own gem, which combines the two things, documentation and code. But actually, at some point, this is an easy thing, but at some point, our controllers were just not looking nice anymore, and you didn't exactly know where to look. So now we started to use Rails provided JBuilder, and you can't see documentation in here. It is in a different file. But we have another tool called Committee, which brings the two things together. So that gem makes sure that your documentation matches what you have in the code. So by running the test, you automatically check your documentation. And then an even bigger change is to switch from mini-test to RSpec. But actually, I'm just kidding. I love mini-test, my team too. Most of them, at least some. Okay. So let's take a look at some counter arguments. Yeah, fun is great, but I don't have enough developers, and surely I don't have enough time. That's pretty short-sighted. Those investments will definitely pay back sooner or later. Scared developer might say, I don't want to touch this. This is actually already far too late. This is the broken Windows theory in practice. Just start avoiding that. Next one. This is my repo. Yeah, this is the kind of ownership which is not the preferred way. It's protective, it's defensive, it's gatekeeper syndrome, and I really hope you don't have any one of those guys in your company. The better way to look at it, we see in a minute. Manager who was a developer 10 years ago probably says, yeah, never change a working system. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Again, this is pretty short-sighted. It's in the long run, it's unmaintained code, which is unsafe and will eventually break. And then the random architect might say, we need to be big changes, and this is too big for this agile cycle. And yeah, this is pretty much a lame excuse. Just break it down and make it smaller. But enough of pushback. How do we start? We define conventions, rules, guidelines, provide a structure, hierarchy, maybe even follow the Rails way, introduce Robocop, split out some microservices, or organize, modularize your code in gems. Think about what could go into the lib directory. We have work streams, team leads, and guilds, and all of that. Yes, we have all that, but only as much as we need. And what we actually have are principles. And we have many of those principles. We don't have them written down. They are not publicly stated anywhere. And I really had to think about this while preparing this talk, like, what are we doing? And at first I thought, oh, it's people. No, then it's tools. No, actually, it's those things. We live them every day. So let's have a look at a couple of those principles. Think big, act small. Dream big, dream about where you want to go, and then take the first small step. Own your code and your tests. The goal is to love your code with no compromises. Be responsible to drive it forward. This is not meant in the defensive way, which is the gatekeeperism. This is meant to be more like think open source. You are the maintainers of the code, owners of ideas and the core concepts. Everybody is invited to add to it and to change it. You're the enabler, and nothing else. Next one. Embrace change, permanent change. Yeah, this is common sense, but it's not easy. It's hard to let go of habits. You have your favorite tools, and even if the new tool is better in many regards, you still insist that your tool is the better one. Next one, use simple code. Your code will become worse over time, will become more complex by itself without you. It doesn't need your help. Always write code for others and never just for yourself. And the same goes for your own development environment. And actually, if you think about it, this is where Rails actually really shines. This is where Rails started. Started with looking at Java and at all its tools, and it was just like, it just didn't really work. So Rails started with make it easy, make it nice, don't restart servers all the time. Maybe you do today because of some configuration changes. Think about good enough. Basically, that means you have to know when to stop. There is a good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. Call it 80-20 rule, whatever. Just don't do more than what you need. No sacred cows. Maybe aside from mini test. But the point here is, agreed, the bigger the challenge, the harder it is. In the end, it's just communication and expectation management. What else? Listen to your people, listen to your teammates. Even that sounds easy to do, but it's not. But you have to listen to other people. And this goes hand in hand with psychological safety. I can't emphasize this enough. I didn't put it much here. Because don't ridicule anyone. Maybe their unbiased point of view is exactly what you need. Because you're too deep into everything. They are brave to bring it up, so be grateful. It's an opportunity. But even with all that, we still at Sharesight have issues. For example, all of this requires increased communication. There's a lot of small changes. We always have this compromise between feature development and refactoring time. There's objection to change. For example, there's the idea to move over to microservices from Majestic Monolith, and with that comes containers and complex development environment. But you have to find the right balance between this, and you have to continue to fight your boss about finding the time. Well, the good thing is for now is that I'm the boss now. So other things, priorities, especially around big changes. Yeah, hint, just make it smaller, so and break it down so it stays under the radar. Sounds easy. Growth versus culture. You always have to be careful that your team your project, your company is not growing too fast, because then your culture will suffer. You always have to make sure that everybody is on the same boat, and so that your culture holds up with all of that. That's a great movie, by the way, particularly the scene. If you have the impression of not moving forward, and sometimes it's just not fast enough, I can tell you that's not a manager who tells you that, it's yourself. Celebrate even small successes. Okay, I just realized writing this talk, like, why do I use Brad Pitt images? I don't know. It was just accidentally. But here's one more. So just to recap, people, time, continuous integration, continuous integration, yeah, sure. Renovation, using principles, start small, start today, never stop. And so the key question, is it fun? Well, thanks. It still works. It can be very arduous. It's not everybody's thing, but I like it, and this is my happy face. Any questions? Comments?
For questions, we have this extra microphone. If anyone would like,
The speaking box.
we can help. Any questions? I'm just slightly worried about hitting everything.
Is there a special Star Trek GIF collection that one could go and peruse? How did you get so many great Star Trek GIFs?
It's all on my hard disk. I collected them over 20 years.
They're beautiful. One for every occasion. Thank you. Who's next?
I don't actually have a question, but I just wanted to say it is fun, and my mantra is generally a little less shit than good enough, and it is fun doing that, sort of tidying up along the way. So yeah, I'm sure other people are saying that's not fun. It's fun.
It is.
So,
I'm sure over the years you'd have wrestled with, do we need to pull this out into another service? Should it be an engine? Should it go to the front? You know, there's so many options, and fashions change. How has your thinking evolved over time? Like, how do you make those kind of decisions now when you get to the point where, you know, actually this probably should be pulled out? How, you know, or we should split this? How do you how do you think about that?
It clearly depends on the size of the problem, but I guess we talk about bigger things. And then what we did in the past, painfully, is trial and error. So we just started a prototype. We started to, for example, extract out our calculation engine into an Alexa-based service. And in the end, it technically worked, but not to make performance better. And we never got to the point why. And we just stopped it, but we stopped it by far too late. So we didn't even follow our own principle of good enough. And like, it just doesn't work, so let's kill it. So we try to understand, try to dig deeper, and it's just a grind sometimes. So how do we decide? It's just a couple of people who bring that up and start with something like, you know, can we make this better? Then you extract it into just an isolated code base, because 80-minute test run. And yeah, just start small. I think this is the only advice I can give. Start small, try to extract a tiny problem. And what we did now just recently is we started to actually measure the performance calculation to try to find out which step exactly is wasting all this time. And it was eye-opening. It's really great. I really feel excited about this now.
It's really interesting. Can you share where you got the data to tell you where you wasted the time?
No, we just started to measure and use Ruby benchmark and started to put that metric into Datadog, and then we could just play around with that.
Oh, so runtime, not human time.
Yeah.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Going once. Going twice. No more questions?
You.
Cool. Next up we have Lucy telling us how to make deleted data useful.
I'm sorry, Alex. I'm not going to share my screen for like half of this. So.
I feel like I should entertain or do a magic trick or something. Just to.
Sorry, I thought that might help. It did not.
Oh, top right. If you go top right, listen to view.
Oh, right, that one.
Okay.
Oh. That's probably not.
Can you pin Gabe's? Because that would actually show, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right. Thank you.
This is actually working right. Yeah, it is. Cool. Okay. Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a developer in Optimal Workshop's platform team. A lot of you already know me, but I've been a Rails developer for about 8 years. First at PowerShop and Flux, and I moved to Optimal a little under 2.5 years ago. Today I'm going to talk through a project that I've led at Optimal and walk you through how I created a gem to solve this problem. Yeah, so the problem is data privacy, which I realize isn't actually a problem. But it does lead to some interesting challenges when you think about it from an organization's perspective. Most obviously is we want to know why people leave us and stop using our product. Up until this point, we've been deleting data when someone requests to be forgotten. But if we delete every piece of data pertaining to a customer, including all the surveys and studies that they've ever done with us. I should probably make a note here, Optimal Workshop is a kind of study-based tool where we allow people to send out studies and participants to complete those studies. But if we delete all of that data, then we're left with a really biased data set when we're trying to look at how people interact with our product, because we're essentially just saying, hey, let's look at all the people who like us and see what they do, which is not useful. So what's the middle ground? Obviously, we have to remove anything that's personally identifiable or sensitive for the customer. At Optimal, we promise to remove anything that's customer data, which we've defined as anything that a customer types or enters in our site. So this includes like survey names or questions that they've asked or any of the participants' answers. But what it doesn't include is stuff like how many surveys they've completed with us or how many participants completed those surveys. This is really useful information for Optimal to know, but completely harmless if it's no longer can be linked back to that customer or organization that used Optimal. So with those, words. So the approach that we just chose to take when removing customer data then was to de-identify it. This means overriding anything that's private or sensitive. For example, you can replace a survey name with de-identified survey or something to that effect. Or you could hash an email address so that you can still link it to other emails in your system so long as they're hashed via the same method, but because hashes are irreversible, there's no way to determine who this person was. And finally, the last decision we had to make before actually building something was, what do we do with this data when it's de-identified? Do we want to leave it in the production database or do we want to export it somewhere else? Both have major advantages and major disadvantages, but because of how our data science environment worked at the time, we decided that leaving it in production was best for us anyway. So that leaves us with a pretty clear set of objectives. We need to be able to choose how to de-identify every column in our database. We need to be able to de-identify all data that's related to a single customer.
and it needs to be maintainable so that when new tables and columns are added, this doesn't get missed and left out. So when you've got a problem like this, the first thing you do is look for third-party tools and libraries. But surprisingly, there's nothing in your Rails at all that solves this problem. There are gems that anonymize large chunks of data, but none of them anonymize things that are related just to a single account. So we decided we would probably have to build something that was our own. To give some perspective on this problem, we have 120 models. 69 of them contain customer data, and it's spread across 270 columns. So writing a really basic script to just run through a customer and all of the tables related to that customer isn't a particularly great option. What I would like to build, or at least I started thinking, what would be best would be essentially have a catalog of columns and how you wanted to de-identify them. And then to solve the how do you de-identify all problems, sorry, all data that's related to a single account, that was a bit more difficult. So we thought about, okay, so maybe we should have like a path back to the account on every model, but that proved complicated and kind of a bit messy. So in the end, we decided that recursion was probably the simplest way to deal with this. So when we de-identify an account, we also want to de-identify all surveys related to that account. And when we de-identify the survey, we want to de-identify their questions and participants, etc., until every piece of data that is linked to that account ends up being anonymized.
Okay, Lucy, I just wanted to check, you won't need to be sharing your screen.
Not yet.
Okay, cool, just okay. You're good.
Yeah, no, where am I? Somewhere. Right, so yeah, what I wanted, so essentially this catalog would probably have to then include the associations that contain customer data as well. So for an account, the surveys need to be de-identified. So we need to understand that that link needs to exist essentially and be de-identified. So writing the gem, now I need to share my screen. And don't look at my Slack. Done. So when writing a gem like this, I always find it useful to just imagine how I want the interface to look before I even start writing any of the code. So in this case, I want there to be a module, de-identify, which defines 3 methods. So I want there to be a de-identify method, which takes the column, and the method which you de-identify it. It can also take any additional arguments that you might need. For this case, we want to replace the survey name with a new value, so we need to pass in that new value as well. There's a de-identify associations method, which takes a list of associations. And also we want a de-identify method that actually de-identifies something. So for the record, this is not the actual gem. This is a simplified version because the actual gem's commit history is not this nice. So this is just a demonstrative purposes. So we start with just a module. It needs to be a concern because we're going to be using and defining class methods. And we also just created a skeleton of the de-identify method that takes a column, the method of de-identification, and additional arguments. Then we need to save that because this is a class method and we don't care about what it is until we actually want to de-identify it. So we have to reference these values later. We need to store it somewhere. So we'll use a class attribute and initialize it as a hash and just store a de-identify configuration, which is a hash which maps the columns to the methods and additional stuff that you might need. And after that, we need some classes which perform the actual transformation. So I've got an example of 3 here, but there are more in the actual gem, which are these classes take the old value and return the new value. So in the case of delete, it just returns nil because we're deleting. In the case of replace, it'll take the old value but will return this new value passed in. And in the case of hash, it'll take the old value and hash it using a hash algorithm, and a not so secret salt in this case, secret in the actual case, but yeah, so it'll return that hashed value. I've also added an error check to make sure that all the methods that we're using to de-identify actually exist. Then we can de-identify pretty easily. So we just need to loop through every single column in the configuration and de-identify it, which you do by just passing the old value into these classes and then writing that attribute. If I'm going too fast on the code, just please let me know. And I'll slow down, but it's, yeah. So after that, we've got this de-identify associations problem, which works exactly the same way. You just define a class method and a class attribute and store the results. And we've also defined this de-identify associations method. So this will go through each association and de-identify it. So associations in Rails are either singular or a collection. And if it's a collection, we need to loop through, but otherwise we need to just de-identify the singular. How you tell whether it's a collection is where it gets kind of interesting. Is Rails, when you define an association like belongs to, also creates a belongs to association object. This object like contains all the information that shows the link between the two classes. So it has both of those classes, the keys that you use to link them. And also helpfully for us, a collection question mark method, which tells us if this is singular or not. So you can fetch this association object on any class or any model that you want, just by using this reflect on association method and just passing in that association name. I've once again added an error check here. So if that association doesn't exist because it was a typo or something, this raises an error. It's kind of unfortunate because I want to put this error up here so that when it's first defined, there's an error if the association doesn't exist. Unfortunately, I can't, and it annoys me greatly, but anyway. The reason that I can't is because this is a class method. It's being called while Rails is kind of first parsing this class. So some associations might not actually exist yet. To put it simply, any associations that happen that in the class before this de-identify associations call exist, but any afterwards won't. So I can't safely put an error check here, which is irritating, but okay. So then we need to call this method somewhere. I've decided to put this in a callback. It doesn't need to be a callback, but I needed to define callbacks for a different reason entirely. So it was neat to put in a callback. So you can define callbacks on de-identify pretty simply. There's a define model callback, which you can just call callbacks literally anywhere in your code just by running run callbacks around a block of code. And so any before de-identify hooks will be run here, and any after de-identify hooks will be run here. And the one that we care about is we've got an after de-identify to de-identify the associations that need it. So this works. This now can take an account and de-identify, assuming you have all your policies defined, it'll take an account and it will anonymize all data related to that account in both the accounts table and any children records or tables that exist. So how do we make it maintainable? At the moment, if you add a new table, you could forget this and it wouldn't do anything. So what I want is a test that fails. If someone adds a new table or a new column and they forget to do this. But in order to get this to work, I need to make one more change to the gem, which is to create a keep policy. So this does nothing. It returns the old value. It doesn't update this column at all. But what it does do is it writes this to the de-identify configuration, so it makes it possible to distinguish between columns. Sorry, it makes it possible to distinguish between things that we've forgotten because there's no de-identify configuration and things that we've considered and we know are safe and we're happy just keeping. So once we've done that, we can write a test that just goes through every single model and checks if there's de-identify configuration for most of their columns. So how we do that is we'll just use application record descendants, which will give you everything that inherits from application record, so all models, meaning all tables. A side note is we do have to eager load in this test because we're not explicitly calling any classes and Rails tests lazily loads. If I didn't do this, application record descendants would return nothing, so not very useful. But once we've got this, we can easily check for each of our columns that that column has a configuration to de-identify. And so this test will fail if anyone adds a new table because it will get picked up in this application record descendants and this de-identify configuration won't exist for that table yet. So this is good, but probably a little bit overkill. There are some columns we know aren't going to contain customer data, like IDs definitely won't, primary or foreign keys, just they're database links, who cares? And you could make a decent argument that columns of certain types, like Booleans, probably won't contain customer data either. So why should we make our developers unnecessarily just say they're safe when they're going to be saying they're safe for every single table in our database? So we can skip them in this test pretty much. So how we do that is we skip the ID in the most dumb, boring way possible by skipping things that are called ID. Booleans are equally easy. You can just look up the type of the column and skip it. Foreign keys are a little bit more interesting. So we could skip everything that ended with like _ID, but it's a bit ambiguous because we could have something in our database like Social Security ID, which is not a database reference, but we really, really shouldn't ignore it. So fortunately, we can do better. We can use those association objects that I was talking about because they are used by Rails to correctly form its SQL so we can use active record without worrying about how the SQL joins two tables. They know what their keys, their foreign keys are. So we can use this to find all of the associations on an account and use those objects to collect all of the foreign keys that are used in those associations. And once we have that list of foreign keys, we can just ignore them in the same way that we're ignoring everything else. And once we've got that list, it's pretty simple. We do exactly the same thing. We just check if there's a de-identify configuration for all of the columns that we care about. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. We did write one other test, but I don't have code for this because I didn't think it was particularly enlightening to share. So we wanted a test that picked up the case where there was an orphan table. So one that contained customer data but wasn't linked back to the account via those associations that we were going to de-identify. So the way we wrote this test was we started at the account, the class, not a model, and we used the associations we knew we wanted to de-identify along with these association objects to tree search out from the account, collecting all the classes that we found. And so once we had that list of classes, we could compare that with the list of classes that contain customer data, which is anything with a policy other than keep. And if there's a mismatch, we know that there's something off and we're probably missing a class and not de-identifying it when we should. It's probably, as a relevant disclaimer, this test isn't 100% certain to pick up all cases. There are definitely cases where it should fail, or we would like it to fail because we're not de-identifying data correctly, but it doesn't. But it does get most of the common cases like new tables, so it seemed worthwhile to have in our code base anyway. And I think that's pretty much me. So yeah, so this is a gem that we built. Obviously there are a lot of other aspects to this entire project that I haven't really covered, but I had a lot of fun building the gem, so I thought I'd share it. But if you've got any questions or anything, I'm happy to answer them either now or later. But thanks for listening.
Who's first?
Was like the original plan to build this as a gem, or did you like kind of build it into your code base and refactor it out into a gem?
Like I proof of concepted it kind of in our code base, but as soon as we decided that this was the approach that we wanted to take, no, we knew it probably was best to be a gem because it just kind of separated it out, so we didn't have to worry about it.
Sure.
We've also open sourced it now, by the way, as of Friday. So
Yeah, yeah, we had this similar issue at my previous company for like GDPR when that came along, and we built this whole solution ourselves and then didn't end up open sourcing it. So I'm glad that someone went home and did that. It's a really interesting problem to solve.
it is, yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a really elegant piece of metaprogramming. That was very cool. Did you have any issues with like third-party data? Like, how do you hook into sort of like
Yeah, so
CRMs and all that fun stuff?
that's why we needed the callbacks. So
Right.
I use the callbacks to essentially, we've got a bunch of files uploaded to S3 and AWS. So we use the callbacks essentially to say, please remove this before we go any further. So we'll have like a before de-identify or after de-identify, I've forgotten which, that deletes all the data from third parties before we de-identify.
Okay. Does that like trigger background jobs and things, or does it just do it in line?
It just does it in line because we don't have like, well, I'm pretty sure all of our queries at AWS aren't, they're async queries anyway, so
Right.
yeah.
Cool.
It does lead to a problem as it doesn't roll back like absolutely perfectly.
Yeah, it's definitely. We've found similar things where like the job doesn't quite work, and now you've got like two slightly different records, and you try and sync again, and it's
Yeah.
exciting. Sorry, I can't see actually see everyone. Is there any other? I'll see a chat one. Sorry. So this is from Alex. What's the first insight you discovered from the subset of users?
I don't know. This project's actually still in progress, so we're almost done, but we're getting there.
Yes, another one. Did you have any issues with like foreign keys, like stored procedures and database triggers or anything, or is it all kind of
We
just
don't
hooked nicely
really
into Rails?
have any. The only issues that we had is we did have major issue with this project was how our data warehouse kind of evolved. So when we started building this, we were just running essentially a copy of production to run SQL queries in, but about halfway through, we migrated entirely to Snowflake, which is a data warehouse that just stores JSON. So it stores a bunch of like It stores every update, so we had a lot of. I'm not sure. It's really interesting. I'm not sure if I would build it the same. I probably build this gem the same way, but I'm not sure if I would 100% make all the same decisions if I knew where our data warehouse would be in a year. But unfortunately, we were halfway through by the time we got there, so it's sort of what it is.
Sounds like a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
Were there any like sort of unique challenges when making this like an open source product that you sort of had to consider when building this for like any number of, any particular code base rather than just your own? Or was it kind of the fact that you built it in like a meta programming way from the start that wasn't such a consideration?
Yeah, no, it wasn't such a big consideration because we've got, like I said, we've just got so much. We have a lot of tables to start with, so we were dealing with a lot of edge cases already for us. So it was just making sure that nothing we put in the gem was like private to Optimal Workshop was actually possibly the hardest part, but it still wasn't that complicated. So no, because it was meta programming, it was pretty simple.
And when new columns are added, so that when new tables are added, it's handled that. I might have missed this in the presentation, but is there some sort of a alert like the test fail or something?
Yeah, so we have the tests that I showed are in our main code base, not in the gem. But yeah, they will fail if someone adds a new column or a new table and doesn't update these.
Awesome. Cool. Awesome.
Yep. Now that it's gem, given a hypothetical monolithic Rails platform that many of us are familiar with, could you see how, can you visualize how that would work for that platform for removing data, de-identifying information?
When you say
hypothetical,
I think so. Yeah, you've got to work out what you want to do with that data afterwards, because leaving it in production is definitely a decision, and it's not a bad decision, but it leads to a lot of additional challenges, like hiding that data from normal queries. So we have an entire extra layer of complexity on top of this, where we've got discard, which is essentially a soft delete gem, which is hiding all records that we've de-identified, which it works, but it's an additional overhead for developers to actually care and think about.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to think about the type of scenarios where other platforms or other code bases could use the gem as well, and it's the only one I could think of. As well. Yep.
Hang on. Sorry, I know you've answered this, but short-term memory. We primarily were mini test. Our code base was primarily mini test. What motivated you, or why you choose to use RSpec for this gem?
I initially wrote this in Minitest because we were using Minitest, but because of this being a gem, I essentially had to spin up I used my SQLite because it was the easiest, but it just spin up a database as part of the test, and add tables and add columns in that test setup. And Minitest wasn't doing a very good job at just clearing data out of that database. So we converted everything to RSpec, and suddenly everything's being cleared properly. So it was more the fact that it was just doing a better job at resetting to a stable point.
Master Priest. Excellent. Thanks, Lucy.
So we're actually running exactly to time, which I don't understand how that's happened, but thank you. So yeah, I think next up we have Gabe Workshop telling us about Optimal story.
Just getting that top. What are the plans?
Stand on the stretch.
Hello. Hey, it's working. Hey everyone, how's it going? Hello. Yay, I think I'm the last talk of the night, although we might squeeze Ariel in depending on how it goes. I'm Gabe, if we haven't met before. I'm one of our heads of engineering here at Optimal Workshop. I focus a bit more on the product side of things. If you haven't met Dement over there, he's the other kind of head of engineering in the platform space. And I guess I'm here to share a little bit of a story about Optimal Workshop, and this is one flavour of it. This is my own flavour, and it's actually quite cool seeing Ellery here, if you don't know Ellery, because I'm actually pretty sure, word on the street, when he left, I was hired into his role. So he's probably got heaps more backstory. So if we've got lots of juicy questions later on, he can probably help answer some of that as well. Although he probably didn't sign up for any of this, so maybe he won't. I guess for this talk as well, we do have quite a few Optimal Workshop people here tonight who cover lots of different things. I'm going to go over some random topics, some of them quickly. So if you do want to learn more about it at any point, use the Q&A just to dig into some stuff. Sound good? Cool. What is Optimal Workshop? Who is Optimal Workshop? Who here knows about user research? Show of hands. Heaps of people know about user research. I saw a couple of wavy hands. But you know, user research is the concept of understanding your users and really kind of looking at them sideways and kind of understanding what's going on. And there is a particular form of user research in the information architecture space. Information architecture is, you know, the art of using content and its arrangement to portray particular things. A classic example is like, think about the settings menu on your phone and how it's grouped together, and think about if you wanted to find the setting to control how time zones adjust automatically when you change location. You know, that's probably going to be under clock, which is probably going to be like a third of the way down the screen or something like that. You know, there's a particular art to deciding a good information architecture that helps people perform certain tasks and to achieve certain things. And there are research methods that help you understand if your architecture is fit for purpose, or help you figure out the right information architecture to convey certain things. And we provide software to help you do that research, is the kind of short version. So we're a SaaS product. We play internationally. So I think something like 60 or 70% of our customers are in the US. The majority outside of that's in the EU, with a little bit in New Zealand and Australia. So it's quite cool to be a Kiwi company but playing internationally. That comes with challenges on its own. And just to kind of quickly mention, like I guess the nitty gritty side of what we are. You know, we're a set of research tools, and those research tools are there to kind of help with particular tasks. And we're kind of survey based in a sense. So Lucy mentioned the concepts of studies and participants. Those are kind of like key to our, you know, a researcher comes and creates a study, and then they might get, you know, anywhere from 10 to 100,000 participants come to that study to help them kind of answer their information architecture questions. And so one of the themes, I guess, to set the scene for this talk is we as a business have taken on investment for the first time. Optimal Workshop is maybe 13 or 14 years old. Ellery could probably answer that better than I can. 15? Cool, I got some signals from the crowd. On Tuesday. And we've kind of been self-funded for that up until last year, where we kind of took on some investment with the intention of growing significantly, which from a tech perspective is really interesting. I'll talk a little bit about that now. But there are a couple of little things we're going to pay attention to while we kind of do this growth. So the first, and this is kind of things we've been paying attention to for a while, but we will continue to pay attention to. So the first one is, how do we become less monolithic while still remaining monolithic? Which is a really weird kind of thing, and we'll talk about it, but it's, it's the art of working towards options in the future, options that might allow you to fork off certain things because your growth demands that you fork that off. And so I kind of I'll show some ways that we have been applying that kind of principle. Another one around decouple when the time is right. So, particularly tied to the first one around becoming less monolithic. We have quite a keen eye for trying to figure out, when should we pull something out of our Rails app? When should it become a responsibility of something else? This third one is around basically making sure we use our tech resource well. Own what differentiates us, outsource the rest. So our dev resource is pretty precious. We've got 20 developers in a 100-person company, and we want to make sure we use that for things that it's best fit for purpose for. And that has us poke a lot of questions at things we're doing and kind of asking the question, should we be doing it? The de-identify gem that Lucy just talked about, that was a case of oh, yep, we need that. That's part of what we need to do to kind of play internationally. So we better own that and do it. And this last one, which we'll talk about, is owning your change, which is particularly when you make technical change. Don't half-ass it. Do it proper. And I'll show some cases where maybe we're not doing it as proper as we could, but also talk about some scenarios where we are kind of owning our change. So what is Optimal Workshop? Let's kind of look a little bit below the iceberg. And at its core, excuse me, we're kind of three big old apps. And we've got two WordPress sites, one for marketing, one for the blog. And then we've got our Rails app, which kind of backs the whole survey experience. And, this is us applying those principles. Kind of 3 years ago, the entire marketing site was kind of owned by the Rails app. If you wanted to change anything on the marketing site, just change a little word, you had to come through the Rails team. And we had to prioritize that against our research work. And 3 years ago, we were like, hey, we're going to remarket our whole, do a redesign of our whole company, and kind of following in line with those kind of mindsets from before. We were like, sweet, now is the time to decouple this out of the Rails app. So, spun up WordPress, and it's been awesome. We now have a whole marketing team that is fully self-sufficient in moving that forward without any help from Rails developers, which allows us to focus on, what differentiates us, which is our research tools. So we're just going to keep digging into stuff in this talk. So we're about to dig into the Rails app. So what is the Rails app? Ooh, Rails app. It's 3 computers is what it is in a short version. This is production. We run on Amazon. These are the snapshot of the EC2 instances that we have up. We have 2 web machines running, and we have 1 background machine. Again, going back to that point of decoupling when the time is right. Many moons ago, we kind of knew that we would be getting a bit of it as we grew. We would be getting more need for background processing, and so we spun up a background machine that serves. It's the same Rails code base, but it's there for the sole purpose of background jobs. And that's been a decision that's been super awesome, because anytime you want to throw something at a background machine, you can. So that kind of decoupling when the time is right thing has I guess, playing out a lot. So, on the theme of making things less monolithic while still remaining monolithic, we look pretty monolithic here with just 3 machines. So we'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into it, just to kind of talk about some of the things we're doing to be prepared to branch off should we need. So this is a bit of a snapshot of our Optimal Workshop GitHub repository. And I guess, why am I showing this? This again is us starting to isolate things, to get ready to pull things out when we need. So we've got our infrastructure as code in here. We've got Spacewaffle, which is our main app. Ellery would have probably named it. I didn't name it, but that's a great name. That's a good name. You know, we've got our WordPress code themes in here. We've got a component library. There are some things that we're still questioning whether we should actually own. You know, we have a whole hand-rolled permission system called Recurso here that kind of back to that theme of own what differentiates us. You know, does our permission system and the way people access resources does that differentiate us as a tech company? Kind of not really. So this is an example of something that we might actually choose to free ourselves from in the future, because it may not be good use of our time. But what this allows us to do is, you know, in the future, say we are investing heavy in our front end, which we are, because we do a lot of kind of client-side heavy stuff. We might want to say some things like, hey, we would really benefit from more focus into our component library. And, you know, today we could spin up a new team to focus purely on that repository. And, you know, we've already done a bit of the work to get that isolated to be able to support us to kind of focus on it if we need. So this kind of theme of becoming less monolithic while staying monolithic is playing out in quite a few different places. So let's dive into Space Waffle, which is the main kind of Rails app. This is like OG Optimal Workshop Space Waffle. So Space Waffle is, we Rails 6.1, soon to be Rails 7, Ruby 2.7, soon to be Ruby 3. We're a pretty old version of MySQL, soon to be 8 this quarter, which we're all looking forward to. We bring about 100 external gems into production, and they all in turn bring in a lot of dependencies, but we start with about 100, and I guess that ties into a big theme. It's true of the Rails community, but if you can, try and find someone else's code to do what you want to do. In certain situations like de-identify, we couldn't find it, we do it ourselves. But when we do it ourselves, we make sure that it's isolated. So if we need to put dedicated focus into that later on from a growth perspective, we can. So we've got, you know, 5 internal gems that we kind of publish and host ourselves and bring into Space Waffle. Over time, we've had 13,000 pull requests, which is, I don't know if that's a lot or a little, I'm not sure. It's about 12 years worth of history as a code base, about 65,000 commits. We've had about 60 contributors over time, 20 people contributing right now, just to give a bit of a kind of snapshot of where we're at. And this is just, I'm just going into some quick little details here for anyone interested. You know, this on the left is the pull request merged into main this Monday. So we have a bit going on, and you'll get a little snippet into Semaphore as our CI/CD pipeline. I think, you know, you can see we've got some feature server deploys going on, but we've got about a 14-minute test suite time, I think spread over 60 threads, a bit of RSpec and a bit of mini test. Bit of jest, all kinds of things in there, and we've got about a 15-minute deploy window. So, you know, for every one of these pull requests that got merged on Monday, every single one of them would have resulted in a release as well. So we get out often, which is cool. So I figured one of the ways to kind of look back into the past of Optimal Workshop was to look at the line of code history. And I don't know if we've done this anytime soon, but it's recently, but it's cool. It's cool to look at. I've never done this with a code base, but back in 2012, you can see we were pretty, not many lines of code, which was probably the glory days back then, although it's still pretty good right now, I'll be honest. And we've had pretty steady growth, just over 200,000 lines. I will add this is in the app folder, so there's still a lot of tests and config alongside this that kind of aren't counted, but you can see some interesting stories here. An example, if we look at the blue bar down the bottom, this is JSX, this is React. You know, this is us back in 2018, kind of choosing to lean away from Ruby HTML ERB files with CoffeeScript and a bit of moustache here and there to really lean on a technology that really helps to differentiate us, which was React in this case. And we do a lot of client-side heavy things that benefit from React. And so you can see that kind of playing out. If you look at it, just the stack way to look at it, you know, what are some examples? So the orange is HTML ERB files. You can see proportionally on their way down. We've got JSX on its way up. Another way to look at that is, so you can see our lines of code for React on the way up, Ruby's still on the way up, Sass slightly on the way up. All these things here, these get a little bit more interesting. These are technologies we are kind of leaning away from. And one of the points I made right at the start was around owning our change, owning your change, which is being, really purposeful at changing technology. And this actually shows we got a bit of room for improvement, because what you might expect to see here is if we are leaning into React and really, really investing heavily, which we are, you might see us with as aggressive degradation in the CoffeeScript that we have floating around, and the Ruby, the HTML ERB views that we have floating around. And this brings us debt the more we keep this floating here. And so owning our change is all about making sure that when we do move to new technologies, we're really good at getting rid of the things we're moving away from, because it's really easy to leave it there and forget about it. We've still got a little bit to go in that space. And so what I want to dig into now is just a little bit of a story around our front-end evolution and its connection to Rails. This is your stock standard Rails app, or we'll call it the basic approach. You've got your Rails framework supposed to be this kind of box over here. And your client wants some kind of page that comes to Rails routing, which gets handled by some controllers, and that gets some, data through models, which pulls out a database and eventually renders a whole lot of stuff on the back end using CoffeeScript and HTML ERB views, and whacks that over to the client. So we were here, back about here. This is where we were. This is kind of what we did. And at that time, we were like, hey, we need way more front-end capabilities. The future, the thing that differentiates us is the things we can do in the front end. So let's really figure out how to bring that in. And there's a kind of pattern we follow really heavily here, which is a really, really odd name, but it's the strangler pattern. Hands up if you're familiar with the strangler pattern. Cool. I'll give some details on it. So the strangler pattern comes from, I'm going to butcher this, but it comes from like the tree world, where some tree, I don't know what the tree is, gets its like seed planted in another tree, and then it basically grows over that whole tree and gets rid of it. And what's left, the tree that's left, is that one that started from the seed. And you can apply that principle really, really well in tech by basically embedding a seed of a technology and let that get a footing to take over more of your application. And that's basically how we've made, a 3-4 year transition with React, is we've used the strangler pattern to sprinkle little bits of React here and there, and they have kind of started dominating to kind of across the whole page. And so this here is an example where this entire page is backed by an HTML ERB view. This header is stock standard HTML ERB backed with CoffeeScript for its functionality. But then we've just kind of left these things in red. These are actually React components. We've got 2 React apps on this page. And we've gone through various architectures to support this, which is using Rails in really different ways. And I'm going to kind of show that in a second. This is another example just where we are much further along with the strangulation. I wish I had a better way to describe this. The header is still a HTML ERB partial, and the root page is still HTML ERB, but pretty much this entire thing, this entire studies thing in red, is a React app. And so you can really see kind of React app is kind of taking over in this space. And so the evolution, I'm going to show the evolution of kind of the architecture. So the first thing we did, a few years ago, is we got really interested in just doing a little bit more client-side stuff. And so we kind of followed this architecture. These are made-up names, so we'll see if they stick. But we did this thing called the stuffing approach, which someone reaches out for a page, it gets handled by Rails, the view gets rendered through HTML-ERB, it stuffs some kind of data in there, and that eventually makes its way back to the client, and that data is then used to render a React experience. So we're still really leaning heavily on the Rails framework here, but then we're kind of just doing a little bit of rendering on the client. And just to kind of show a little bit of code for that, you know, here's the view, here's that kind of HTML ERB thing, and you can see we're making a div that React is going to get mounted to. You know, this is going to get substituted for a React app, and we're using the data props to basically just cram a whole lot of things in the project. In this case is a active record model, and we've got a bit of JavaScript magic going on in here, and that JavaScript is basically this. It's just using React to render whatever component we want, mount it onto that app. There should be some data getting passed through here, but I forgot about that in my example. But you know, this was the first evolution, and it's pretty static. You know, these React components can't do anything, and it's pretty heavyweight because we're having to stuff a whole lot of data into the page that gets back to the client. But hey, that's cool, did the job. You know, helped us get more React in. So the next evolution is what we call the kind of the fetching approach, and this is where, rather than stuffing a whole lot of stuff into our React components, we were like, hey, we've already got a whole lot of Rails controllers that are floating around to return data, or we can at least make them return data we want. Let's gear these views up, these React components over here, to kind of just go and fetch the data that they need. And basically, let's give these views all the URLs they need so they can go and do stuff like make updates and get all their data. And so we kind of shifted to a little bit of the only change here is, rather than passing through all of the data, we pass through a URL to a particular controller. And so, you know, the Rails app is still in control here. It's still really telling the React app what to do. And we're still leaning quite heavily on Rails. Because, you know, someone might request this Reframer app. It gets handled by the Reframer controller, which kind of puts in this div. That Reframer app ends up getting mounting and rendered, and it now knows where to fetch its data from. And so it reaches out to the GraphQL controller it was told to fetch its data, and away we go. And you know, it does the job. We're starting to get maybe some inefficiencies going on here because there's a few kind of extra round trips happening, but this is the architecture that we've been following for, I guess, we did this stuffing approach for about a year. We did the fetching approach for about a year. And again, this just allows our apps to get bigger and bigger, our React apps. And the approach we're doing now is what we're kind of calling this self-aware approach. God knows where these names came from. And it's using Rails in quite an interesting way. Which is almost not using it too much. We, in some areas of our product, I might add, a huge amount of our product is still really well backed by this original basic framework. A huge amount of our product still that isn't too client side really does benefit from this, but for some of our real client heavy parts, this architecture here, what we're up to is, I'll show the code and then I'll come back to the architecture. So the code now looks like this. Here is the Reframer app, mount the Reframer app. Don't tell it anything, you know. The app knows everything, knows how to get its data, it manages itself. It's more or less single page. And what that's meaning is, it's quite interesting, right? We've now got routing happening over here. Oh, sorry, I'll go back one. So to show the loop, someone requests this Reframer app. It gets handled by the Reframer controller, which renders that code we showed before, which basically isn't doing anything apart from getting some React ready. The Reframer app gets loaded up, and then everything is taken care of by that app. The app does its own routing because it might manage quite a few pages at once. It's got heaps of views that it manages. It no longer fetches out to any kind of these individual GraphQL controllers, individual Rails controllers. it fetches out to a single GraphQL controller. So we have a single GraphQL controller that backs every one of our GraphQL requests that every one of our self-aware apps are now using. And so it's kind of, if you kind of step back for a minute, we're starting to find some duplication in roles that certain things play in our product. An example here is we now have routing and views kind of handled in two particular places. And this kind of data management thing is definitely still using Rails, but it's using it quite lightly. It's just one controller that uses the active record interface to fetch stuff. And so it's kind of, we're in this interesting space here, just trying to figure out what to do. And it might allow us to do some things, and this goes right back to that point of becoming less monolithic while still remaining monolithic. And decouple when the time is right. Soon, the time might be right for us to pull our whole front end in this area of the app out of our Rails app. And we might, I don't know, host that somewhere else as just some static assets that, clients pick up, and all the routing and views and renderings all happened on the client. They might interface with our Rails app just for fetching. And that, even this being isolated allows us to scale this and do things with we want. But, this isn't something we're locked in to do yet, but it's something we've got the option to do. And we've got the option to do this because we've been thinking about this as we build stuff. Maybe just a couple of quick little challenges to kind of talk about here, because there's a few things that you don't realize would cause pain until you look closely at it. So if you're familiar with how Rails does internationalization or localization, it's all, you've got a YAML file sitting in your Rails code base that has all your translations. For one area of our app, we support 70 different languages. And in the back-end view, you get your translated strings kind of there and send just what you need over to the client. Our translation files are still kind of owned by our Rails app. They're still kind of checked into our Rails app as YAML files, but well, shit, the front end needs those now, right? The front end that's doing the rendering, that's the one that actually needs to be able to do the language stuff. And what we're doing right now is we're taking the entire translation file from Rails, and with every request back to the client, or for some requests, for the requests that return the root page, we stuff the whole translation as a JSON blob into the window. So React can then lean into that to do the translations, and that, that's inefficient. There's some troubles there. Customers have the whole set of languages on their client and have to download that to be able to make requests. So there are a couple of trade-offs we've had to make as we've done this, and we're kind of paying attention to as we grow. How do we? Hey Tana, I hope everyone online can see Tana stretching. Oh, they can. Good. There are a couple of just like, this comes at a cost, this style of architecture. The value is it's allowed us to, as we work, get more and more React into our app. But there are costs, a lot of costs that come alongside it. Some other interesting challenges, like particularly for developers who work on product, what do they identify as right now? Historically, we would have put job ads out and we would have said, hey, we are hiring Rails developers, because the reality is you're working in all of this, and that is true for a good part of our product still. But for another part of our product that is perhaps soon to be in this paradigm, you might be just kind of playing here in the client space and maybe a bit of GraphQL. What do we say on our job ads now? You need to know a little bit of Rails, because you're going to have to run a Rails stack to get this whole thing up and running, because we are still a Rails monolith. But you might not be touching too much Rails. You actually might be more of in the front end space, or just working on some GraphQL stuff. So there's some interesting little nuances that come to a little bit of this. What are the last points I want to make? Testing is a real interesting one. way back in the day, sorry for jumping around a bit here, but way back in the day, as to test anything, you needed a whole stack. You need the whole rail stack to pretty much do anything. And it meant we leant heavily on integration tests. We've had a lot of troubles with flaky integration tests over time. And part of it is because our architecture hasn't supported us to test our apps in any other way. This is more of a kind of a nice thing than a challenge. As we are at this kind of architecture now, we've actually isolated a lot of stuff. And from a testing point of view, we're pretty well geared up to, test our front end through React testing library by itself and to really move away from integration tests. So we're getting some cool kind of benefits from making this kind of slow incremental change. So that was a bit of a whirlwind. Just to recap, even if you are a monolith like we can kind of look like, and a lot of us, probably the topic has come up a little bit tonight, think about how you continue to become less monolithic while staying a monolith. Because at some point, the time will be right that you'll pull that thing out. Maybe there's lots of different reasons why you might want to pull things out, but you kind of want to have a few tricks in your bag to be able to use when that's the case and not get caught off guard. So, think about how you step towards being a little bit less monolithic while remaining monolithic. Own what differentiates you as a tech company. I didn't touch on too many concepts for that, but we have a lot of hand-rolled things here. We have a hand-rolled billing system. We have a hand-rolled permission system. We have a hand-rolled subscription kind of system. And we ask questions quite often of like, does this actually differentiate us? Should we be spending our dev resource on working with this? So I guess think about that one. And then the last one around owning your change is if you are doing something like this, making this transition like we've been doing here, don't half-ass it. Don't just bring in a little bit of React and then forget about all the other stuff, which we actually have been doing just a little bit here, but that's all right. Don't half-ass it. Own the change that you're going to make. If you're going to shift to a technology, a new technology, be very, very thoughtful about how you do that. Is that my talk? I think that's my talk. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Any questions? Comments? I think, should we also segue this into the Q&A if any other ODub people want to be able to answer stuff? Like, we have ODub people here, so if you want to ask any general ODub questions, we've got a whole lot of people here who can answer stuff.
Okay.
Sure. Hi, yeah, I'm Gabriel as well, by the way. I have a question about how I see you were using GraphQL. Can you share a little bit of your process of how you introduced GraphQL? Because I'm assuming you have to create your own resolvers and create your own queries, while also, having your Rails focus on your APIs and things like that.
Yeah, I guess that strangler pattern that I showed to get React in, we apply that same pattern for getting technology in, which is basically slot something in one place and use it, see how it goes, figure out the hard stuff. And so, we put GraphQL in, I can't remember what the project was, but maybe a year ago, we were like, sweet, this one feels good. Feels like it's a good vehicle for us to test some things. And so we just kind of figured that out, did some examples that helped us tease out some of the hard stuff. What we also did was we have a bit of an RFC process here, where request for comments, where before we make bigger change, we really want to buy into it as a tech team. So particularly in that GraphQL case, we also, someone did a little bit of an experiment to understand it and the complexities of it, wrote up a bit of an RFC about, here's what we're thinking and here's how we think we want to use it in our code base and how it's going to map to the concepts we already have in our code base. Let's talk about it as a faculty. Let's get on the same page with it. Let's thumbs up it as a faculty, and that thumbs up means we're all now committed to trying to integrate this tech into the projects that we're doing. We also were able to, in a lot of cases, with a lot of the GraphQL resolvers and stuff, lean a lot on the active record things that were there. It also caused a lot of trouble. There were certain ways that GraphQL wants to fetch data that didn't play too well with active record, and I don't think we've fully figured some of those out. Yeah.
Julie's just pointed out the pizzas here, so we could get some pizza and then carry on with Q&A if that's works for people. Eating and talking is a little bit challenging, but I think we're going to call pizza. There's probably a fair few more questions floating around.
Hey online people, we're just going to take a quick 1 minute break to grab some pizzas and come back to our seats. So hang tight with your questions. Sorry that we don't have pizza for you online. Okay, you got 1 minute, go. Grab some pizza and sit back down.
Yeah.
I love that.
We're also at a similar location where we split our own front end about 3 years ago.
Right.
Just the whole process for React. But it's almost identical.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was thinking exactly the same. Like I hadn't seen like the steps name before, but through like pretty much the same thing.
Yeah,
we're having fun with the GraphQL part, but we're like, it makes a lot of sense now that we've got what are basically JSON APIs sitting in controllers.
Yeah.
Just like injecting into the RVs.
Yeah.
Well,
I suspect that's kind of why I wanted to show this. I expect a lot of people are doing this in various ways, which I think the real interesting one to chat about for us is Rails is still hanging around. It still serves lots of purpose, but in some places like that, it actually serves not too much of a purpose. Well, it's questionable some of the use of the controller view stuff, and so we just, I don't know, open some interesting questions about what do we do with Rails in that space.
Yeah, we've been doing like simultaneous Rails and .NET for like the last 6 months. It's interesting just having both simultaneously.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, Rails is good for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to quickly try something.
Yeah. Hey, you got 10 seconds. Come back down this end.
Do you want any pizza brought to you?
No, I'll come get some.
Wow. Yeah.
How are you, Alex? What do you have for dinner? Online?
I don't know yet. I will see once I go upstairs. I don't know. It's gonna be improvisation for me.
Nice.
You're doing the same stuff as well. You're doing the same spot, right? Switching over to React, like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Is like I suspect a lot of people are in very similar spots and facing similar challenges of how to kind of best use Rails to.
Yeah, and we still have those stuffing things in there. But
Yeah.
switching over to fetching.
Yeah.
But we don't have any GraphQL yet.
Yeah, it's the GraphQL one's been pretty cool, but it's cool to do that stepping approach as well. Like it works. There's nothing wrong with any of those in betweens. You fellas want to come down from the pizza table? Bring your pizza down this end so the people online aren't left hanging for too long. Then we can eat more pizza.
Does anyone have a question they want to pick up? I realise throwing this is now kind of dangerous.
All right, ask it anyway. Oh wait. So you talked about owning a change. What's stopping you? How are you going to do it? Even like, how are you going to achieve that, downward trend on the copy script? I mean, it looks like it was pretty steady, and there's probably reasons why it was there. What are you going to change now?
Yeah, good question. One thing that springs to mind, and we've been trying to do this a lot more, is up visibility. So, hey, you fellas down the back, do you want to come down here? Julie, do you want to come down? It's just a bit noisy. So I think one of the things that we have learnt is don't do these changes in the dark, your tech changes. Make it very, very visible. And that's visible beyond the tech group, because in a way we as tech here are here to serve our product. We're a product company at the end of the day. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is make it really, really public, these tech initiatives that we're doing, and public the positive things that come along with it, why we're doing it, why we need time to do it, how we contribute it, how we bring it alongside projects and initiatives we're doing to the product, but also bring the kind of cleanup and the debt side of that very visible as well, and make it kind of understood by kind of a lot of people in the business why we want to remove some of these old technologies, why it's beneficial for us to spend time to get rid of certain things. So we have certainly been putting a lot more visibility into increasing the use of tech, which is why, like, we have this big concept here, our reactification effort, that everyone in product knows about. It's a very, every role knows about what's going on and knows about us doing that in the project. Not as many people know about the debt side of things. So I think going forward, I think we've just got to figure out how to bring a bit more visibility to that as something that is part and parcel with doing this work.
It feels like the complexity you added by the long transition. Like, were you aware of that cost when you started? I mean, obviously, you count problems when you count problems, but it's like if you'd known about that ahead of time, do you think you could have sold a more radical transition?
Definitely, yeah. And back to that point of like owning our change, it's actually kind of a bit of a new mindset for us. I think historically, maybe 5 years ago when we brought React in, we didn't think too much about what does this mean for other things. We just, for the things that React now takes over, we just thought about, cool, React, let's get that in. So I think going back, we would certainly put some more scrutiny into how do you progress the downward trend as much as you progress the upward trend. For us, that's where we lean heavily on this RSC process currently, because if you're writing up the introduction of a new technology, we're gonna want you to tease out all the stuff about how do we get rid of the other things it's replacing, and make sure we all talk about that and get agreement on it up front before we do it.
What's it? Oh God, I'm afraid.
Do it. Thank you. With the sort of different technologies and different request paths and things, are there any sort of performance issues you've found that were sort of particularly challenging to deal with in terms of having sort of Rails render and React load data, and each page I presume has to reload the React app, and how did that sort of played out in the last couple of years?
Yeah, what's the answer to that? Lots of troubles, I think, in lots of different places. One of the prime examples was GraphQL fetches data a little bit differently to how some of our historic controllers may have, and that because we've been around for 13 years and we're a survey tool, some of our tables are huge. There's a lot of rows in there, and we kind of slowly make performance improvements as we go, as we run into scalability issues, bringing indexes here and there and stuff. But particularly with GraphQL, we found that it used our data in a way that hadn't been used before, and that put quite a bit of strain on our system. So, the introduction of GraphQL actually did bring a bit of, in some point, service degradation. We're like, oh shit, things are locking up. So I guess combined with the strangler pattern, we also have a very kind of healthy rollout safety net system to ensure that for bits of the app that are migrating to a new tech, we can also introduce it at a very cautious rate. So, Monday morning, we can ramp something up to 2% of customers and sit there and look at the logs and kind of be like, how's it looking? It's looking good. Anything unexpected? We can do all the stuff beforehand, but we've got those safety nets there as well. So that's one example. But yeah, there's still certainly some inefficiencies around, like that locale file is another example where, every client now has all of the string translations on their machine, which is just a little bit too much.
Awesome. You mentioned that locale file, and my next question is about that actually. So do you serve like your apps to mobile users as well? Like, can I access some of your apps from my phone?
Yes. Yeah, via a web browser. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, how big is that locale? Is that quite a large locale file? Like, if I was on data, would that start
if you're on data with that site. Questionable, maybe, yeah. And one of the things I didn't show is one of the ways we've dealt with this kind of monolithic code base, but quite non-monolithic product, or the product is split into different things, is we have quite a lot of isolation happen in our code base. So for certain areas where we know they're mobile dominant, which is our participant experience, that's totally isolated from the webpacks are their own things, the YAML files for translations are their own things specific for that. So we have made sure we've got a few performance helpers there, but we certainly are aware that we have some things to keep an eye on just to make sure we don't run into too much trouble from a performance perspective.
And you also mentioned that like sort of the React was a decision sort of it was to like distinguish yourself or something, to like you mentioned something along those lines. Is that to build sort of like interactive UIs, like the UIs that you wanted to be able to update in real time and all that sort of stuff? Is that kind of the... More or less, yeah. We gone are the days of really anything static for us. You as a researcher, you create a study, you get a whole lot of participants to come in and do that study, and our bread and butter as a product is our kind of in-app visualizations for helping you digest and work through that data to understand, to tease little bits of research insight out of it. So we'll always be continuing to lean heavily into client-side experiences, which is kind of where the React thing came from. Yeah.
So I've worked on code bases kind of doing it, sort of following a similar path of, elder statespeople Rails apps, kind of, they've been around for a while and they're getting more and more React. And I was just wondering if you got like how you all think about that bit, like when you put React on a page, it's great. You've got, okay, great. All of my caching works. I just have this one React bit, and it's this, I think you call it the stuffing bit. And it's when you put the second bit of React on the page, and then, you want to get those two bits to talk to each other. Like that's where React kind of metastasizes a little bit. And it's like, actually, if you want to do that really cleanly, you just need to put like all of the joining bits in React as well. And there's kind of this natural pressure that builds up for, React to essentially become the whole page, which for like some of those examples you've given seems like a totally fine, like there will be situations where that's totally a fine choice. But for the tensions where we had a lot of situations where that wasn't, it was kind of marginal. And we've solved that with we wrote a little message bus thing. We did things, but I don't think we love any of them. Like, maybe you can talk to like what that experience was, if you felt that tension, how that resolved, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely felt that tension. So I don't really have an example to show, but a core part of our app, we're all tab based, and there might be 10 tabs that each have content into them, and we don't want to do them all in one go from Reactifying them. That is way too much work. And so we've paid real attention to kind of our React scaffolding that really supports us to piecemeal things. And we've done projects that have focused not really on delivering product value yet. They've focused on getting that scaffolding in place that we can then chip away at the product value. And so in this case, we brought in a higher level React component that basically managed those tabs, and we had a bit of an architecture that allowed a tab to be loaded from a Rails partial or be loaded as a React app. So what we could do then is just start slotting in, tab by tab, reactifying it, switching out the Rails partial thing and getting a React tab in there. But that came at a huge cost. Someone's got to write and maintain the system to do this. We have to get rid of it at some point. So that's probably one example where we ran into that. But the short version is know that you're going to need to do it, create the space to do it, and think about upfront, how do you get some of that scaffolding in place once or limited time that then allows prolific advancement of tech in other places because you put that scaffolding there. Like the value that came from the effort to put that scaffolding in, we very much reap the value from that.
Hi. I was just wondering, like you started out classic Rails and there's a great Rails dev community, and then you started bringing in the React. And I was just wondering how you organized your teams now that there's sort of like two techs that you could, dedicate, a good chunk of career to and just be doing one. Yeah, so how do you make sure people have the right skills so you're not like bottlenecking teams, and is it subject matter area that you organize them by or specialism? Yeah.
Yeah, cool. It's an interesting question. So I think for us, we really want to gear our teams up, particularly our product teams, to be able to own everything needed to get done to do a project. You as a team are there from the problem definition to seeing that through to production however long later. And we want to make sure your team has every skill set needed to do that. And so most of our teams have 3 to 4 developers on them, and we ensure there's a bit of a mixed bag of, so we've got a bit of full stack here and there, we've got some back-enders, we've got some front-enders only. We kind of pay particular attention to each team to ensure there's a kind of well-roundedness that team is quite capable of doing all the things they need to that might come across their journey as they're going on product. The other thing that we've done is we're realizing there's quite a bit of a cost to maintaining some of this architecture that allows us to transition technologies, that tab thing that I mentioned before. And so we've recently introduced what we call a platform group that focuses on the kind of back and front end platform technologies that support our product squads to focus a little bit more on the product development. So what we have is like, a front end developer or two in the platform space who might be thinking about the scaffolding that they can put in place. They won't actually do any of the reactivation. They'll just kind of get that scaffolding there that will allow our product squads to then get in there and leverage that. So yeah, I guess having a bit of team dedicated to get a bit of that support scaffolding there is another way that we try and help with some of that.
Cool, thank you. I can't grow.
Hi, sorry. Question is, so as you know, the ever-evolving front end, for example, there's just constantly new stuff coming out, like React 18, we got Jest 28, we got all these things. How do you stay on top of tech debt? Like, how do you manage that basically in this organization?
I'll answer it in a couple of ways and we'll see if that does anything useful. We are trying to spin up a tech radar. Have you seen a tech radar? I can't remember who puts it out. It's this basically a little framework to allow you to think about different areas of tech. What should we be keeping an eye on? What should we be trialing? What should we be investing in? What should we be removing out of our system? So we're trialing getting one of these tech radars up as a bit of a talking point for us. So it's less about how we manage debt, but it's more about how do we keep an eye on the industry and kind of make proactive choice around when we should invest or de-invest from a particular technology. Another one that we do is our RFC process. So this is kind of more around how do we be careful about introducing debt, which is this request for comments process is basically it's a GitHub repository we have called RFCs, and if you want to suggest a change to our technology, do we have a template that you follow that teases out a whole lot of questions? Why do we want to do this? How do we know it will succeed? How do we, mitigate the debt that we bring in? And someone writes that up as a pull request into the repository, and the whole faculty gets in on it. We share that at a tech wrap we have each Friday where people kind of talk through the open RFCs, and we basically debate it and think about how are we going to make this change in a way that serves us well in the long run. So that's probably one. Then the last one around other debt. And we still got a lot to go in this space, but it's basically make debt visible and really articulate the cost of that debt in a way that a lot of people understand, not just your developers. So we really want to make sure that our product owners and our product people who are influencing a lot where our teams spend their time are really aware of the debt and the debt we're trying to pay off. Yeah, that's probably another. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. We got you, Alex.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about React and JavaScript, and I tend to like to see that sometimes the branding, the style sheets and CSS gets mixed up in there and starts to merge within the JavaScript and the React. Do you have any patterns or libraries or style guides that you use at Optimal Workshop for your branding and for your theming, for everything around styling your apps?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is yeah, we have quite similar troubles, and we make sure we're quite strict at things like, hey, keep CSS only in our SAS files and nowhere else. Kind of back to that point around kind of owning what differentiates us. We know that we are very front-end heavy with our product, and that's what kind of sticks out for us. And so we introduced a component library many moons ago, maybe 5 years ago, that the intent of that was to really kind of own our front-end space and ensure that we, I don't know, do stuff a little bit more proper in the front-end world there. And that came with a few kind of written guides on, you know, how we separate our CSS and JavaScript and all of that stuff. So I don't know if that helps too much, but yeah, it's a topic we certainly talk about a lot, and have some kind of resources that we, I don't know, help guide people in the right direction. Maybe there's another thought on it too, which is we often spin up kind of groups here to talk about topics if those topics are the hot topic right now, and front end for us has been, you know, a hot topic right now for 5 years or longer, but particularly in the last 5 years as we bring more React in. So we ensure we spin up, I think guilds is maybe the concept a few people are familiar with, but we make sure there's a lot of, it's front-end champs where we are, but we basically create the space for that discussion and synchronization. So if things aren't like written down anywhere, you've at least got vehicles to get people on the same page. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'll let you go. It's Peter. I was just curious, like what your CI pipeline looks like and how that's evolved in sort of parallel with these changes. But that's probably quite a
I can give you like the super quick version, which is we've always had a team that's really focused. A part of what they look after is developer happiness, and that includes the pipeline in a sense, because a long pipeline is unhappy developers. And so, you know, we've always had space dedicated to kind of answering the question of what's the next best thing for us to do to bring a little bit of developer happiness often into the CI/CD pipeline. And so, I don't know, we're not really doing too much fancy. You know, we have just a whole lot of tests spread over, you know, 60 threads running through Semaphore. We also have a team focus a little bit more on the deployment stuff, so some other people don't have to worry. The product developers don't worry as much about that. So I don't know if that helps answer it, but basically ensuring there is always time and space and resource to think about how do we improve some of these developer happiness things.
That's great answers.
ties into what Thorsten is.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Do you want to grab the mic just so they can hear it online?
You guys, I think I heard you say you have over
100 employees in the company, right?
Or something under 90 to 100, something like that. Yep.
I'm just wondering, how do you split your teams? Like how many teams do you split your teams across a certain way, or that work for, like, let's say front end, back end, marketing, or how do you do it?
What's the general split? So one of the splits to start off is a bit of, it's not really a split. Like 100 people is not that much, and we're all pretty in tune with what's going on. So I'll talk about some splits, but they're not as like cut down the middle as you might think. So we have a bit of a split between revenue and product. Revenue focuses a bit more on the revenue related side of getting our business moving, and we have the product is more around that bread and butter. Or actually, right at the start where I showed the blog and the Rails app and the marketing site, they all kind of fits under product. And then inside of, I'll go into product because that's the one I am in and know the most. We really want to create the space for our product teams to do what they do best, which is build good product. And we really want to support them with the things that go into launch, like having a successful product, marketing, data, all of those other things. So we basically currently have 3 product teams that are have dev designers, product owners, their own research kind of capability, and they're really trying to move the product forward. We've got a lot of other teams that support a lot of that, but also do a lot of their own initiatives around, their marketing and their data stuff. Platform is a team that I mentioned before that we really spun up to focus on a little bit more of the kind of architecture side of things and a lot of developer happiness stuff. But, thinking about if we really want to create the space for our product teams to focus on building good product, how do we get a bit of stuff out of the way, particularly in the tech world around, CI/CD stuff and infrastructure and some of those things. So we've moved that out to a bit of a platform group. So the 20 developers is basically spread across 4 teams. But then we ensure that we really want those groups to be really, really well connected, because the more you're connected to all the other developers, the better you can do things. So we lean heavily on faculties or guilds, I think some other businesses use, but it's basically craft people bound together to really stay in sync with what's going on. So we use that vehicle a lot here. Hopefully that helps. I'm gonna go eat some pizza.
Okay.
All right, I think that's it then. Thanks very much to Optimal Workshop for hosting us, and we'll sign off from the online people and consume the pizza.
Yay!
Thanks, Alex, for organising, and Jordan, who may or may not be on, I'm not sure. But great work.
There he is.
A lot of behind the scenes stuff.
Get well soon.